to the UI Connection podcast. GoFan and VNN are proud to be the exclusive sponsor of the UI Connection. Now a combined company, GoFan and VNN provide a seamless integration for digital ticketing and athletic websites. Direct your fans to one place for all your athletic events, communications, and tickets to home and away games. Thank you to GoFan and VNN for their exclusive sponsorship of the UI Connection.
Welcome back to another edition of the UI Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hutch Hunter. Today we have as our special guest, Whitney Randall, the Assistant Director of Athletics at Westlake High School and the head boys volleyball coach. Welcome to the podcast, Whitney.
Thank you for having me.
Let's have you begin by sharing with our audience here in the United States and across the world where you grew up, where you went to college, your first job, etc.
Awesome. So I was born in Utah, but I moved to Washington pretty soon after that, and I was raised in Washington State. I went to Rogers High School in Puyallup, Washington. I played soccer, volleyball, and basketball there. But if you asked me back then, I would say I played volleyball, right? And then I just was on the team for basketball and soccer. I definitely performed well in those sports, but I definitely was like not as invested in those. Like I knew from a very early age that volleyball was kind of my sport. Although I did really enjoy my time playing basketball as well. Soccer was fun. It's a lot more running than I was used to.
Yeah.
But I still enjoyed it. Graduated from Rogers, and I signed with Utah State Eastern down in Price. It was formerly called CEU, and
Right.
I think they had like changed the name maybe 3 or 4 years before that, and Utah State had bought it out. So I spent 2 years in Price, playing volleyball there. A really good experience overall. Right after I finished playing those 2 years, I went ahead and I got married to a kind of a local Utah kid. He lived up in Utah County. He graduated from Lehigh High School. Also played a little bit of volleyball. And that's when I transferred to Utah Valley University, where I started my deaf education degree. So I was learning how to become a teacher using American Sign Language as the main form of communication. After those 2 years, I graduated, and I think I had a 6-month-old baby boy at that point by the time I had graduated. And I got a job teaching American Sign Language at a local charter school out here in 2016. After that 1 year of coaching volleyball at this charter school, it's a really small school, Rockwell Charter.
Mm-hmm.
I think I only had like 500 kids or so, 7th through 12th. So it was like a little bit on the smaller side. So I finished out my 1 year there, and I transferred and got a job at Westlake. I was an assistant girls volleyball coach there for 2 years. And Westlake at that point was splitting. And when it came to like the pecking order of things, like I hadn't been at Westlake very long. So I ended up moving to Cedar Valley High School, where I was an assistant volleyball coach there. And I also was an American Sign Language teacher. I was there for 3 years. And during that time, I decided to start down my master's degree path, I guess. And I applied and got into Arkansas State University, which I've never been to Arkansas, but that's where my degree's from. And I graduated from that program in 2020. So I have a master's degree in athletic administration from Arkansas State. Like I said, I've never been to Arkansas. I had plans to go out and see it since I graduated from there, but I would have graduated June of 2020, so it was pretty like locked down. We didn't have a physical graduation that year. So in a lot of ways, like I feel a lot of like camaraderie with like some of these 2020 graduates, because like I also didn't get to participate in a graduation just because of the pandemic. So I finished out 3 years at Cedar Valley, and I ended up, and I don't really know how I got this job. It's hard because like living in the community, and like, you know how Utah is sometimes, like you just know a lot of people, and
Right.
like and they were like kind of looking for volleyball coaches, and they were kind of looking for somebody to work in athletics. So I just kind of threw my hat in the ring. And I was hired there 2 years ago now. I guess I'm in my second year at Westlake. So I've been in public education for 7 years, 1 year at a charter school. 3 of those years have been at Cedar Valley, and 3 of those years have been at Westlake.
All right. I'm fascinated by the fact that, let me make sure I say this correctly, because I think it's great that you're coaching the boys volleyball.
Uh-huh.
And I'm wondering if there's any kickback because you're a female. And the reason I ask that is years ago at Jordan, and this has got to be probably, maybe 20 years ago, maybe not quite that long. But we hired Mary Kay Amicone, who's now the softball coach at Weber State. We hired her as our baseball coach.
Mm-hmm.
And we took all sorts of, well, because it was
Flack, perhaps.
because it was a female coaching.
Right.
It was not only a female coaching young men, but it was a female coaching baseball. And as you know,
Mm-hmm.
baseball has like a book this thick of unwritten rules, that et cetera,
Right.
et cetera. So I'm hoping that your answer is going to be, of course, this is the first year for boys.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping you're going to say you're not getting a lot of blowback, but I'm interested in the perception, or if you've got some people stuck in the Stone Age that are just dismissing you because you're a woman.
Right. I think, like, first of all, thank you to women like that who kind of like stepped in and have kind of shown people that sometimes it might just be something new. It doesn't have to be something scary. I think in a lot of ways with how boys volleyball is specifically in the state of Utah, like girls volleyball has been sanctioned for like ever, and so it's viewed as a more predominantly female sport. And while I look at like the numbers and the enrollment and the club system that we have out in Utah, I don't necessarily think that it's like still an all-girls sport, especially for Utah. I think that there's a little bit less blowback because it's such a female-centric sport. I'm pretty young. And so with any young coach, and especially because I'm the opposite gender, it comes with like a lot of, like we've had a lot of conversations where I'm like, look, guys, like I'm not your friend, but I am friendly. Like we don't have, there's just a lot of boundaries that I've had to come in really firm on in order to kind of like establish some things. But the group of boys that I have are just so awesome. We've got some really good athletes, and for the most part, I haven't really come across anything negative regarding like my gender or my age in coaching this team. We've only had, like, our season starts in February. It's a spring sport in the state of Utah. So we've just had kind of like open gyms, and I haven't really talked to or interacted with like a lot of parents or people who are outside of this group of boys. So I guess we'll see. In a lot of ways, I think athletics has come a long ways in understanding that, like, with like diversity of coaches comes with a diversity of thought. And although that can be like scary or shocking sometimes, especially in some of these older sports like baseball, what you said, sports that are a little bit more established, sometimes just having a different perspective as a coach can bring a different perspective to the player. And the way that I look at it, especially with boys volleyball, is that they will have like so many other coaches other than me. And so maybe I am bringing a female college perspective to what they're doing. And they can take that as they play with other coaches in high school and also in college. So that's my goal.
Excellent. Let's have you talk for a moment about the mentors in your life that have had a big influence on you.
Mm-hmm. So I was really lucky. I had some really great college, or I had some really great like high school and club coaches, and I had good college coaches too. I think in general, probably the coach that had like the most influence on me was probably my high school volleyball coach. She was just a very tough lady. If I should be careful what I say, but she was an awesome athlete. She was a dual sport athlete at Pacific Lutheran University. She played in the 90s and early 2000s. She was volleyball and softball. She also played basketball in high school. And she was just like one of the most phenomenal athletes I think I've ever met, male or female. And, there's a lot of things that at the time that I was like, wow, like she's so tough and she's so strict on things. And I was like, there were days that I was like, I don't know if this is like, if I can like handle another year or handle another practice. And I think like the older you get, you kind of gain a sense of perspective. And I was like, all of those things that she taught me and instilled in me really like got me to where I am today. She was just a very hard worker. And I look at, my own life and I say, I had a bachelor's degree and a master's degree before I turned 25 and 2 kids alongside of all of those things. And so it's like a lot of those skills that I learned about like persevering and like looking at my situation and planning ahead and goal setting are really things that I still use today. And I think that has like really shaped who I am. And it also made me like want to work in athletics, if that makes sense. Cause I mean, I think it's so hard, especially for high school kids, because we sit there as like, older people and we go like, you guys are going to miss this stuff. Like you're going to miss 2-a-days. You're going to miss conditioning with your team. And of course you're like, no, we won't, coach. And it's like, no, we do. And so it's funny because you talk to a lot of the coaches and they love that stuff and they didn't at the time. So it's just really like this cycle of just like understanding that it's good for you and also understanding that like you're going to miss it even though you don't necessarily like love it right now. And I think that that's what growth is saying, I didn't love it at the time, but I grew through it and that's important. I think another one, if I think about like who really like influenced me is, I think about other female athletic directors that we have in the state. Because in a lot of ways, like their perspectives, while you don't want to like discount like male perspectives, in a lot of ways, like they just have really similar situations to yours. Dealing with maternity leave and dealing with, raising young children and being in a gym or on a field, like, 60 hours a week, it can be stressful. And so like, there's a lot of female ADs that I look up to and talk to frequently, so that I can, make sure that what I'm doing is something that is like doable and possible. And I think Utah has some great ones.
Whitney, what's your biggest failure or disappointment, and what did you learn from it?
That's a great question. So when I was a junior in high school, I broke both of the bones in my lower leg in March. And that was like a big recruiting year for me. It was a big recruiting year for the state. That junior year of club was just huge. And I was out March until I think I got cleared to try out in August. Like I had barely gotten cleared. I was in a walking boot and
it was a tib fib then?
Yeah, it was a tib fib.
And how far down from the knee?
It was down by the ankle. So
okay.
Yeah, what happened?
That's brutal.
Yeah. So the ligament actually tore the end of the fibula like right off. So the ligament stayed intact, the bone didn't. And I'm like, maybe I should have had more milk. I don't know. And then as I rolled that ankle, I rolled it back and it hit. I didn't even explain how I broke it. I fell in my garage as an elite athlete and a 17-year-old girl. I fell in my garage and took myself out for 9 months. But I tripped on like a parking strip. Like we had one of those like concrete parking strip things like in our garage. So we knew when the tire could stop, So I rolled off of that and after it kind of like that ligament kind of pulled it off, I flipped the other way and ended up getting a spiral fracture on my tibia.
Oh,
So it was like
wow.
two pins, and I took out both of the bones, and I was like, this is super bad. So it was not, that wasn't necessarily my biggest failure. But I think about like how I started playing when I came back. And I think that anybody who's had a big injury like this can really relate to it. But I played with so much timidness, and my coach was on, my high school volleyball coach was on me all the time because I was, supposed to be the senior leader, and I was just like making a lot of mental errors. And really it's because I really wanted to blame a lot of my injury on my like lack of recruiting possibilities. And so for me, like it was just an excuse that I could fall back on, even though by the time I was playing my senior year, it was healed. I was good to go. I was cleared. And I think back on that all the time about how that whole year for me was just like very much blaming my outside circumstances more than it was like understanding that, things happen and you have to get over it and you have to like move through it. Cause like I couldn't change the fact that I was injured, but I could change like how I was reacting to it. So I think about that all the time. I mean, it's over a decade ago now. But I think specifically in like an athletic sense, I think about how I really use that injury as like an excuse for like a lot of my for my next couple years of playing. And I want to also say that I like really loved playing at Utah State. I love playing for Chelsea Warburton, actually. And she's now the basketball coach at Utah State, and she taught me a lot. So I don't necessarily think that it was like a negative thing. I think the situation would have been different if I would have had maybe a better attitude about all of it.
That is some great insight. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing this. This next question is maybe a little bit difficult because you've only been an assistant AD for what, a year and a half?
Officially, I was with Sharon Martisich at Cedar
okay.
Valley. So starting in 2020, I started working there as well. So I'm like,
You're
maybe
3 years into it. Okay.
Yeah, it's early. It's early, definitely.
The question is, how has the job of director of athletics changed just in the short time that you've been in it?
So it is like very interesting. Like if my first athletic director experience when we were like planning games and stuff was really during COVID. And so for me, like the kind of like planning that is required to run events, and like those are things that I've always had to deal with in the job. But I've talked to some others, and in some ways, like COVID has really changed athletics completely, and with no indication that it's going to change back to how it was. I think like in general, I think about like youth sports in general, and we just have like such a huge push for like specialization, and we have such a huge push to see like 8-year-olds be recruited to play for Division I football teams before they even hit puberty. And it's like there's a lot of emphasis put in sports, and with that comes a lot of emphasis put into our jobs. I think a big part of what I'm trying to push at Westlake is social media presence. When it comes to bringing in athletes to Westlake and retaining athletes, it's really important that we like highlight and show good things that our programs are doing, good things that our coaches are doing, good things that our players are doing. Because it's those like little shout outs that really like bring team cohesion. They bring school cohesion. They bring like athletics cohesion to a high school. So social media is something that's like huge. Like if you have a program that isn't utilizing social media or has somebody that's over just athletic social media stuff, try to get one, because those are the things that are very visible to the community. And it's also very visible to like outside of the community. When I say community, I mean like the country, and just having like highlight reels and stuff, and shouting out kids who are getting recruited or who are getting looks is super huge, both for the kids and also, again, for the communities.
Very well said. Let's talk about your journey with the UIAAA, which I realize has not been a very long one, but talk about that, how you became involved in the Utah organization. And then I want you to spend a little bit of time talking about your first national conference in Orlando, which is obviously where I met you, and just talk about how that's been a game changer for you.
So for like me personally, I've been a member of the UIAAA and the NIAAA for 3 years now. My first UIAAA conference was in the spring. And that was a good experience. If there's one thing that I really appreciate about the UIAAA, just like athletic directors in general, is I love their love of just like improvement, because I think that's just a carryover characteristic of like any good athletic person. Like when we coach these kids, we want to instill all these good skills, and I think like constantly learning and constantly growing is one of them. So as I go to these conferences and, you're listening to people talk and you're thinking, oh, I mean, like I could bring that back and I could implement that at my school, or, I can make sure that doesn't happen at my school, kind of thing. And so I really love like all the classes that we take, and I love the workshops that we do at the UIAAA conference in the spring. I did have the opportunity to go to Orlando just a couple weeks ago. That was a good experience as well. It's funny because we talk about my gender and my age, and I don't think there were very many people there who look like me necessarily. And so again, it was just like a good opportunity to kind of talk about some of the similarities we have in our programs across the country and some of the differences we have. And really like coming out of the UIAAA conference and the NIAAA conference in December, I always like come out thinking of all these things I have to do. This year this conference, I did a little bit better job of like writing everything down, because I was like, I need to make sure that I'm prioritizing things that are going to make the programs that I serve better. And doing that so that I don't burn myself out or don't put my full weight into something that deserves kind of full weight and full focus. I think like specifically as we talk about at Westlake, one of the things I really focused on was assessment, evaluation of coaches, and also the retention of coaches. Anybody in athletics will tell you that like the coaching pay is absolutely awful, and we struggle to kind of retain really good coaches. And so like something I want to really implement at Westlake is what can we do to better support these coaches, because I've only been coaching high school sports for 8 years now. So I don't have any other experience because coaching high school outside of that. So some of my older coaches are like, no, I promise, like it's changed quite a bit. And we're asking more of coaches day in and day out, and we're paying them less and less every year. So that's something that I came out of that conference trying to focus on, is what can I do to help support my coaches, and what can I do to kind of professionally develop them a little bit.
What's one common myth about athletic administration, being an athletic director, that you would like to debunk to the general public?
Oh man, there's so many. Part of it is like you kind of become synonymous with your school. And I mean, we've talked about this before, but like an athletic director, in its scope, we'll have like 100 coaches and we'll have 1,000 athletes. And so that's a lot of people to kind of like manage and be there for all the time. So, and then we're adding more and more sports every year, which boys volleyball is one of them. But like the division of time is so great. that like sometimes people or programs feel like they're not getting as much love and attention as other programs get. And so it can be hard to kind of establish to the community specifically that, you know, just because you're not there doesn't mean that you're not supporting the program or helping the program behind the scenes. And so that's something that I wish more people saw, that just because you're not there doesn't mean you're not working, if that makes sense, you know, because there's been times when like I've had to step out, you know, of a basketball game, and you're like, well, you know, where's the athletic director? Who's the athletic director? So that can always be really tricky. And then there's always just the myth that, you know, we just sit and watch athletic games all the time, and that's all we do for our job. And I wish that's all I did for our job, because that would be super fun. But like I work full time during the day, and then I work obviously a lot of evenings, and most of my day is spent like putting out fires or talking grades with kids, or, you know, shooing athletes to class. It's not necessarily like an evening only job, where you just kind of sit around your office all day and do nothing. So those are the two things I would say.
I hear you. Whitney, what's the favorite part of your job?
Watching the games. No, I'm just kidding. It is a big part of it though. I think that I don't want to say anybody, most of us who have like worked in athletics and worked as a coach, like there's just something so special about like seeing things like click for kids, or seeing things click for teams. And then just to literally like be like sidelined for like some of the greatest moments of their life up to this point, is just so awesome. And I love working in the school, because I like, you know, seeing when they get a 31 on their ACT, and also make the all region team, and also ask their girlfriend to prom. Like all of those things are like very important to them, and I love to be there watching them do that, if that makes sense. Because like in order to like change a society, you have to start young. So to see how awesome some of these kids are, is probably the best part, because Westlake's got some pretty awesome kids. Cedar Valley had some awesome kids. Rockwell has some awesome kids. Like there's just been there's so much promise in the next generation based on just the kids that I've interacted with.
Great answer and some great insight. Let's finish with a couple of questions. The first being, I want Whitney's 2 suggestions for a brand new athletic director. I realize you're not brand new, but you're newer. So
Yeah.
I'm interested in your perspective of
Mhm.
what you think a brand new AD would have to follow. In other words, what are your 2 suggestions that this new AD would have to follow in order for them to become a success?
Mm-hmm. I think the first one I already touched on, which is like kind of pick something to work on and kind of see it through to the end. Whether that be, you know, for me, it's coaches retention and coaches personal development. If it's, you know, social media, if it's, you know, a strength and conditioning program, whatever it is, like really use your time to focus on that and really make it the best that it can be. Because if you try to do all those things at the same time, as one person or maybe 2 people, it's really hard for it to work out quickly and to work out a lot of the bugs, because you're just too busy, you know, dealing with all of it. So I would say like focus on big program sweeping changes chunk by chunk, instead of trying to do all of it at the same time. Because yeah, you can get overwhelming. The second thing is, let's see, I would probably say that it's like okay to say no. I think like the title of athletic director, really it changes from like school to school. It changes from state to state. And so a lot of these places are trying to kind of establish what an athletic director is and what they're doing. So really our job descriptions can kind of change around a little bit as we see like more things that need done in athletics or more things that need done with athletes. So it can be important for it to say, you know, like, hey, I agree, this is a very important thing that the school should be doing. Which of my tasks do you want me to relegate in order to, you know, make this a priority? Because Sometimes what's put on our plates are all like very good things and very positive things for the schools and for the programs. But it's just too much for one person to do. So I would definitely say like it's okay to say no, and it's okay to really look at like what your tasks are and to kind of reestablish which ones are important for you as the athletic director to do, or tasks that are appropriate for the head coach to do or an assistant to do. That's what I would say.
Great advice. Thanks so much for sharing. We'll finish with this. Whitney, what question should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know. I think like in general, like I say like the institution of athletics is changing so rapidly. And I think athletic directors have a really unique position because they see how that changing industry is changing this sport and that sport and female sports and youth sports and club sports and high school sports, and all of those things are changing. And I think athletic directors are really unique in their place to be able to see all those things happening at the same time. So it would be interesting. And of course, I don't know the answer. But like, how do you think athletics in general is going to change over the next 5 to 10 years? Because it really affects like a lot of things. The youth that we have today are going to be in college tomorrow, are going to be in the pros later, and are going to be the coaches that are coaching the youth 10 years from now. So like, really, it's very cyclical, and it like interacts quite a bit. Just to like, I think it would be interesting to see what the ADs think athletics is going to look like in the future.
Great question. We're going to have to find out.
I know. I'm like, I don't know the answer, but
yeah. On that note, that wraps up this edition of the UI AAA Connection. Again, our guest today has been Whitney Randall, the Assistant Director of Athletics at Westlake High School and the head coach of the boys volleyball team. Whitney, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yep, absolutely.
For our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UI AAA Connection.